I'll try a different machine.
Counting down.
Just give me the sign. Welcome.
Okay. Okay, so looks like the yes. Okay, so it looks like we're live on YouTube now, and we're recording. And so I'm going to mute everybody except for Pat and the delegates and senator. So I'm unmuting Pat, and let's see, Jessica Feldmark, I'm unmuting. Trying to find the rest. Eric Ebersole, I'm unmuting. Clarence Lamb, I'm unmuting. And who have I missed?
Well, Terri will be here soon, and then you want to unmute. You want to make sure she's also.
Yes, I'll definitely do that.
That's who you're thinking of, I think.
Yes.
Are you ready?
I'm all set then.
Okay, we're ready to go. Good evening, everybody. I'm Pat Payne, and I want to welcome you to a special meeting of the Legislative Political Committee of the Charlestown Residents Council. Some of you have joined us by Zoom, and other Charlestown residents are watching this on YouTube. And the focus of tonight's meeting is the upcoming 442nd session of the Maryland General Assembly, which I believe begins on January the 13th, 2021 in Annapolis, more or less in Annapolis, virtually in Annapolis.
There you go.
We're very fortunate to have with us tonight the members of the District 12 General Assembly delegation. Our representatives, Senator Clarence Lamb, Delegate Eric Ebersole, Delegate Jessica Feldmark, and Delegate Terri Hill is on her way. Now, some of you probably know these legislators and are familiar with them. I know that Eric Ebersole is known by almost everybody here, but there are some of us who are relatively new and may never have met the delegation before. So this is really a special privilege to get to see our entire delegation all at once. Now, I want to just go over a few minutes of the Zoom rules of the road, so to speak. We're fortunate to have Hope Tillman, who's facilitating the meeting with us. Everybody's been muted with the exception of the delegation members and myself, but that doesn't mean you can't speak and ask questions. All you have to do is raise your hand and we'll call on you, or use the chat function on Zoom. And Hope, do you want to just mention the chat function?
Okay, the chat is down at the bottom of most of the screens, or unless you have a laptop where it's someplace different. And you can click on it and then put at the bottom of your screen your message to everyone, and I will note it.
And both Hope and I are going to be looking for raised hands, but we might miss you, so keep them up. I just want to mention briefly what our agenda is for tonight. I'm going to introduce very briefly each member of the delegation, ask them to say a few words about what brought them to run for office. That is, in other words, what is their legislative passion? And then we'll talk a little bit about what the committee's been up to over the last few years. And that's going to be followed by a list of questions that we prepared for the delegation. And then we'll open the mic for all of your questions that you'd like to ask. Ready to go. Okay, introduce each one briefly. Senator Clarence Lamb, he's been a member of the Senate since 2019. He's on the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. And he's a preventive medicine physician at the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University. That's why he's so busy right now. Senator Lamb, would you just tell us a little bit about what brought you to want to be in the legislature and what your legislative passions are?
Sure. So happy to be here. Thank you, Pat, for the invite, and good to see all of you virtually. We miss the days and opportunity to be able to be in person. We hope to have that maybe next year. This has obviously been a very challenging year for many folks. You know, what brought me to run initially was really, I think it's that similar sense of altruism that, you know, led many of us who go into the medical field to become you know, healthcare providers, and that's really to be able to help people. And so, you know, I think we also recognize, particularly in my specialty in preventive medicine, which is really the specialty of public health, you know, that there's a lot that plays into people's health beyond what takes place within the walls of the clinic and the hospital. And so, you know, there are a whole bunch of different social determinants of health, from people's level of education, their economic opportunities that they have, the ability to have access to good mass transit and transportation, and, you know, environmental health concerns that all play into people's health. And so, you know, while we are limited, you know, in the tools that we use clinically to help people, you know, when you become a legislator, you also have many more other tools to be able to help people beyond that as well. And so that, I think, was what inspired me, you know, early on to run. You know, I think the second question that you had was, you know, what are our passions, I guess, within the legislature to work on. You know, I think the one thing I'll touch on, because I'm kind of, you know, knee deep in this as well, is you know, the legislature's responsibility to have proper oversight over departments, agencies, and areas within state government. There are three really main legs to the stool when it comes to the primary responsibilities of a legislator, and that's number one, to legislate, to introduce bills and to pass bills. Number two is really the budget. Being able to pass a budget annually is a requirement of the state legislature. And number three is to have proper oversight, to make sure that the departments and agencies are doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of laws that we pass and the budget that we provide them. Oftentimes that last leg of the stool, oversight, is passed on or missed, but I think it's really important. And so, you know, two of the roles that I serve on, one, I serve as a co-chair for the Joint Audits and Evaluation Committee, and also serve as a joint committee chair for the Committee on Fair Practice and State Personnel Oversight, which had a hearing this afternoon as well. So that's kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of my passion and some of the work that I do in the legislature. Thanks, Pat. Back to you.
Okay, good. Now, Delegate Ebersole, you've been a member of the House of Delegates since 2015, member of the House Ways and Means Committee, and you're a retired high school teacher, having taught math and computer science. Teacher of the Year one year. So I'll turn it to you. What brought you to run for the legislature, and what's your legislative passion? I think you're passionate in general, Eric, aren't you?
Yeah, okay. I'll accept that. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend. Well, education, in a word, to be sure. One of the things that brings me to the legislature is that I am able to provide a unique perspective in the legislature about education. Not that I am smarter than other legislators, but I have a life experience that puts me in what I call the brick and mortar of a building, which means that I have a sense of impacts of decisions that are made, both positive and negative, and how they will be perceived by people who are in buildings, teachers, parents, they're there, and students. And sometimes I can question certain things, and sometimes I can really promote things because I either feel that they won't manifest themselves in the building as people expect them to, or they will and perhaps exceed that. And to that end, that's why I'm on Ways and Means. I work very hard to get there. It has one of its subcommittees is called Education. Another one is called Early Childhood, which is early childhood education for the most part. I chair the Early Childhood Committee, and I serve on the Education Subcommittee. And to that end, I have what I would hope to be some influence in affecting some of the legislation that comes forward. Public education is one of people's most significant concerns when it comes to when they're picking people to run and understand it. Certainly right now, as Dr. Lamb points out, and I'm sure Dr. Hill will as well, health is number one. And when it comes to making decisions about education, we worry about, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, this evening, the health of our students in our community before we talk about necessarily the quality of their education, because we can make that up. But without getting into all that, when I saw a chance in this district to be elected and be that person, I attempted to do both for a while, but teaching and stepping out of the classroom for long periods of time was damaging my students and my school a little bit. And so now I'm a full-time legislator, but I like to think of myself still as a classroom teacher who has tremendous perspectives. That doesn't mean this is the only thing I do, but certainly it is the thing that I'm, as you say, I'm most passionate about.
Oh, thank you. And Delegate Jessica Feldmark, who's a member of the House of Delegates since 2019, serves on the Ways and Means Committee and the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology. That's an impressive list. And served as Chief of Staff to the County Executive of Howard County. Delegate Feldmark, what brought you to the legislature and what's your passion as a legislator?
Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and appreciate the chance to have some dialogue, even though it can't be face-to-face in person. So what brought me to run really was my background in local government. I'd worked at the county level behind the scenes for 16 years before I decided to run for office. And I felt like I had a pretty good sense of how government works and how sometimes it doesn't work. And, you know, I think I shared some of the points that my colleagues have touched on, concerns about where we as a community and as a state and as a country we're headed. So I made the decision to run in 2018, in part because I felt we needed leaders who would stand up for some of the things that have, you know, served our society so well that are either at risk or reaching a turning point. Our education, our social safety net, you know, good middle class living wage jobs, things that we need to make sure we have moving forward, and things that I think maybe we had started, some of us had started to take for granted a little bit and become a little too complacent, and felt that it was time to step out from behind the scenes. And as the seat opened in the legislature, I saw an opportunity to step up and make a difference, and to try to serve the community in a different way.
Wow.
So that's how I came to run for office. Now that I'm in the legislature, as you mentioned, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. I serve with Delegate Ebersole, but on two different subcommittees. I serve on the Revenue Subcommittee and the Election Law Subcommittee. And, you know, election law was not something I thought I wanted to focus on when I first ran for office. It was an assignment that came to me, and, you know, I was happy to serve. But it really is such a fundamental piece of our democracy. And I think we all got a special up close view of that this last election, as we saw, you know, the accommodations that had to be made for the pandemic. And so I really think one of the things that, you know, I'm interested in focusing on is increasing access to the ballot, ensuring, you know, election security and voter access, because it is the lifeblood of our democracy.
Yeah, right. I know you'll have some questions about that. Also, we're now turned to Delegate Terri. Terri, you managed to get back online here.
I did.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're a member, you've been a member since 2015. You're on the Health and Government Operations Committee. You are also a member of the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland and Women Legislators of Maryland. And you're also a plastic surgeon, I understand.
I am.
So a little bit about what got you to run for the legislature and what your passion is now that you're there.
Great. First of all, thank you for having us and arranging this and being so flexible during this pandemic time, because I really look forward to meeting with the residents at Charlestown, you know, the couple times every year that we do. So this is great that you're able to that you were able to put this together. And thank you all for tuning in for your entertainment pleasure this evening. So as the last one to go, I have the opportunity to say all of the above. So I will. And what I mean by that is, like my colleagues, you know, I was very appreciative of the importance of public service for serving our communities. But what really got me sort of thinking about stepping out and running for office was recognizing that as a practicing physician, I had the, you know, unique experience of not only representing family members and friends and neighbors, but I also had a really intimate understanding of what people go through in their day-to-day lives. So when I'm interacting with my patients, it's often at the times when they're most vulnerable, when they need support from their government and their community. And over 25 years, I had seen firsthand what happens when those safety supports fall apart. And one of the things that happens when you interact with people, they allow you again into the most private parts of their lives and share things with you. So I thought that as a physician, like Senator Lamb, I could bring that perspective with me and not simply talk as a physician, you know, or a small business person or a family member and a daughter and all of that, but actually speak for my patients too. And at the time, I was very concerned that our country was changing into something different. And I saw the possibility that it could become what I would consider what the promise of America had always been, which is an open opportunity for all, welcoming nation, or we were going to end up becoming more inward looking, more self-serving, more selfish. And I was very concerned that I would wake up in 20 years and find out we had become the latter and I hadn't even bothered to try and make a difference. And so those things led me to run. I had no idea how our country will be pulled in different directions in the subsequent years, as we've all witnessed, and you know, and sometimes try to hide our, you know, our eyes to seeing, but it is what it is. And I would guess if I had to summarize what motivates me are the gaps. It's the gaps, whether we're talking about opportunity gaps, whether we're talking about education gaps, whether we're talking about income gaps, because I believe that if our nation and our state is ever to become all that it has the potential to be, it requires that we support all of our residents to become all that they can possibly be. And so that covers a broad area of interest, but it's still looking to make us the best we can be by making people the best they can be and giving them a really fair shake at whatever it is that they need to do.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to briefly mention what the role of the Legislative Political Committee is of the Residents' Council. And that is, we are determined to remain active in the political and community life, not only in Charlestown, but in the broader community as a whole. And as part of what we do here during the General Assembly session is track legislation and do what we can to lobby on behalf of key pieces of legislation that affect the residents here in the broader community. And Delegate, let's see, we had 24 pieces of legislation that we tracked last year. And I was very impressed with Delegate Feldmark actually asked to see a list of what those bills were that we tracked last year. And I shared that with her and also with the rest of you. So you got an idea of the breadth of the kind of interests of the residents here, all the way from election law to environmental issues, to making certain requirements in hospitals. Of the 24 bills we tracked, 6 were enacted into law. and 2 were vetoed. And what we noticed is the bills that were vetoed either had to do with guns or money.
Mhm.
Those were the lethal characteristics of those bills. So that's what we do as a committee. And now we're just going to talk about some general questions about what's going on in the legislature. And this part of our agenda, any one of you can ask or can answer, or all of you, depending on what one would like to say. So I'm going to go through the list. The first one is, what are we going to expect in the 21 session? What are the hot issues we should expect to come up? Who would like to take that one in the delegation?
I think we're all going to take a piece. We'll start with the
Okay.
senator. We'll let the senator start.
I was going to go in reverse order. Well, yeah, I'll take one small piece and then pass along, because I know there are a lot of questions, so I don't want to hog up all the time here. I think I guess I'll mention 2. So one, I think there'll be a lot of COVID-related legislation, right? So I think we're all still dealing with the after effects of COVID. We're still obviously in the middle of a pandemic. There are going to be need for additional relief for businesses, for individuals. I think there are going to be a lot of pieces of legislation that deal with that, and also with eviction prevention, for example, and eviction protection for renters. There have been throughout much of the pandemic some protections that were in place, but many of those have expired since. And so we're really concerned about what that means for individuals to be able to stay in their homes, particularly as we're going into the cold winter days, for people that may not be able to afford to pay their rent or their bills because of the struggles financially due to the pandemic. We know there are a lot of people still hurting out there. I think when you look back over the last 8 months, 9 months, I think we were all extremely disappointed with the unemployment benefit process and system and how that rolled out. I think we're still taking a closer look at how that can be improved, and why people that really earned the benefits of unemployment didn't receive them. And so, I think there's going to be a lot of effort to try to bring relief to many, many Marylanders who are hurting these days, that we hear contacting our offices, and constituents that are in a lot of pain and difficulty. And I think that's where, the legislature really does need to step up, because this is our opportunity to weigh in and to provide that relief since this pandemic started.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to comment on that one, or I'll move on to the next question?
No, we all have something there. I'm sure. I'll go ahead and go next, and I think my colleagues know where I'll go. We through an arduous and many-year process with the Kerwin Commission meeting and coming up with reaching out to world-class education systems, both in the United States, there was a couple, but we want to be one of them, and around the world, came up with some excellent recommendations that involved much more than just putting more money into education. There were significant policy changes. And if we want to drill down on those later, I can spend some time talking about specifically what's in that bill that is different and new and important to me. The bill will be an expensive bill, but we had set it up in such a way that it could be managed. The bill is called the Blueprint. If you get those confused, they're really the same thing. The Kerwin Commission made recommendations, and then we created legislation, which we named the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. The governor, as you said, most things were about money or one other thing, but money was the one here. He vetoed an omnibus of bills, basically saying anything that cost more money, he couldn't approve because of COVID. In fact, the original budget estimates of $2.2 billion less in revenue this year were revised down significantly. Now, let's be fair, we're still getting a projected budget estimate of deficit of what we expected of $900 million, close to $1 billion. But it's not as significant as before. It's my considered opinion, and this is just my opinion. The governor intended to veto this bill all along because we were fought very hard in the legislature. I'm a Democrat by the Republican Party on this bill. They use the phrase throwing money at education, which is not what we were doing. This was clear and new policy designed to look to the future. But he did veto it. And I think the thing you will see in the legislature is you will see a move to override that veto in the early going. Now, there's a lot of consideration about that. People say, well, you can't just do that. There is less money. And you can't just continue. Well, the reality is we passed an early version of the blueprint in 2019, which is actually the one that's affecting education now. This one doesn't kick in for another 2 years. But that notwithstanding, the other bill had spending in it also. But that's why legislatures meet every year. We will meet this year, and we will take a look at some of the spending that was called for in the blueprint and some of the policies. We may dial them back as a response. But the correct response is not to toss the entire bill out or all the work that was done with it, including pre-K and career paths for teachers, higher pay for them, targeting poverty areas, or a number of things that we can't just, as they say, throw the baby out with the bathwater in this case. And so you will see us working very hard to reestablish this bill, but also to establish it in a responsible way. And that's going to be one of, I worked with the work group that sort of helped to craft the bill and helped to defend it on the floor. And I think I'll be very involved in that again this year to be sure that we're well on track. We are dealing with some, as Dr. Lamb mentioned, some COVID-related problems in education and in early childhood. I serve also on the Joint Committee for Children, Youth, and Families. And daycare, childcare has become a serious issue as far as them remaining viable, but also because children who are school age and are not in school also need childcare. And we are actually planning a briefing soon to try to find out how that's working out so far and what sort of response we might need to make on that. So it's all about children for me in this case, and mostly their education.
Right. Okay, Delegate Feldmark, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I just want to add, I'm thinking about the upcoming session sort of in four buckets or categories, right? So one is COVID response, and that includes everything that my colleagues have touched on in terms of, from the actual medical, healthcare issues related to COVID, the economic issues, small business support, assistance for individuals impacted by COVID, looking at the housing crisis that is looming as folks are, continue to be unemployed and unable to pay rent or mortgages. So sort of one bucket of COVID response, right? The next category I see is veto overrides. So certainly the blueprint is a big one. Other bills that we passed last year that the governor did veto that, I think the legislature will take up to override those vetoes. The third is law enforcement and police reform. There's been a lot of work over the interim with a special task force work group studying that and making recommendations. It is, I think, going to be one of the major themes for this session to make some reforms for greater accountability and transparency in law enforcement. And then the fourth bucket is the one thing we constitutionally have to do during session is adopt a balanced budget, right? So the budget is kind of the other piece. And of course, it has implications for those earlier three categories, right? I think in a time of crisis like this, where we're dealing with the pandemic, but also an economic crisis coming out of it, it's really important that government does not overreact in pulling back and cutting too much, because this is a time when people need government services, need government assistance, and we can help recover from this crisis. So I think the budget is going to be a really interesting and delicate debate this year as we navigate the right path forward.
Thank you. So delegate and delicate. Okay, now Delegate Hill.
Yeah, let me just for those who aren't familiar with this team, we work very well as a team. We all have areas of sort of expertise, and we respect one another. And so you're going to find that a lot of times we're saying the same thing, but the other benefit of that is we'll often fill in what the other one hasn't gotten to. So what I'm going to add, and I think it was implied, but I want to be clear, we have a lot of veto overrides to address, right? We are certainly, from a budgetary standpoint, going to have to look at what the federal government is going to be giving, if anything, to the states, as well as what it is giving directly to people. The pandemic has exposed the weaknesses in our democratic system, in our social support system, and in almost every aspect of our society. And so a lot of what you've heard the others described is our trying to wrestle with, how do we not simply see what's wrong, but figure out, particularly with limited budgets, how to address it. Understanding that there's a long view where you invest in making things better and it pays for itself in the long, in years to come, or you can pinch pennies now and leave people on their own. And what we're going to see in behavioral health, for instance, what we're going to see in addiction treatment, for instance, what we're going to see in education, for instance, is people further down doing much worse than they would otherwise. Businesses are struggling. We're going to have to figure out how to help them, even in ways that the federal government may or may not be able to. So there's just across the board issues that we have to deal with to try and address what has been revealed going through this crisis.
Right, thank you very much. You've been a very good, exhaustive description of the challenges that we face. Now I have another question for you, which is, I have been reading, and many of the rest of us have been reading, the description of how the General Assembly will operate this year. And no lobbyists or journalists in the State House, and the virtual hearings. We're wondering what in this kind of a context is the best way to try to influence our legislators when the normal routes of coming down and meeting with you and so forth just aren't going to work anymore. What's the best, most effective technique for reaching you?
I'll start this one. Let me just say that coming down is great, but your emailing us and calling is effective as well, right? You're inviting us to come to meetings so that you can express, your particular concerns about certain issues and ask us questions, particularly with Zoom. And we always have a very busy schedule during session. We don't get back to the usual monthly meetings that are held in the district as we do in the other 9 months. But the one advantage to the technology that we've all been forced to adapt is we don't have to worry about the traffic on the road. Okay, so I think you continue to reach out to us. I personally feel challenged in how to reach back out to you all. So when constituents contact me, it gives me an opportunity to reach back, which I can't door knock on weekends the way we used to. It's a very strange time. So just like I think the term saying that we're all being socially distanced is just a misnomer. We're being physically distanced, but what we're really trying to do during this 2020 is make sure that we're not distanced socially at all. And I would say the same thing. We can be in communications in some ways better than if you have to get a carpool or a van to come down to Annapolis to try and catch us for 15 minutes and go room to room to room, because we're all forced to kind of deal with the reality of remote interactions. So I think you take advantage of that.
Oh, you're saying we're not looking at it from your point of view, which is it's a lot harder for you to get out and remain in contact with everyone during these times. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Here I was thinking it was going to be a high-tech answer.
Well, there is one, to be sure. but the thing and we can talk about how what it'll look like down there, but that may not be important to you because that's important to us. You know, the House of Delegates actually we're shoulder to shoulder in the real room. So we're actually being sort of divided up into different rooms.
Right,
But
3 different
it's
rooms.
important to note that because of some of the pressures on the pressures on the way we're going to be going through things, but also the back of our mind concern that we may have to adjourn for a period of time. The speaker has asked us when possible to early file bills. This is something we did as routinely before. My understanding is there's over 700 bills already early filed this year, which means that this is the time to be alert. When the bill lists start coming up, they're going to come up quickly. And so you will need to be, we normally have a sort of relaxed period at the beginning where bills are sort of being passed around and co-sponsored and that sort of thing. That's not going to happen as much this year. Bills are going to go in quickly, and there's a lot of bills that stalled last year, not because they really were opposed, but because they just didn't make it through the House because we left early. And so there's a lot of those bills that are going to move through, I think, relatively rapidly also. So what I'm saying is be on point this year, right from the beginning, to look for things that you're concerned about, because I think the treadmill is going to be running when we jump on. We're not going to bring it up to speed, and we'll be moving pretty fast on things. Of course, testifying can be done online and all that sort of thing, but some bills, I think, like repeaters, we may not actually have full hearings on them again, since they were sort of stalled out. And with that, there's more to tell. And as Delegate Hill points out, this is a team, and we like to give some space for everybody to have a little bit of a weigh in. So I don't know what I've missed, but I bet my friends know.
So you said 700 bills?
I heard her say that last night. Johnny Olszewski had an event where he invited a bunch of friends on board, and the speaker spoke. And I'm pretty certain that I heard her say that there are 700 bills already. That's about half of what we normally see in the House.
A lot of them
are bills, but to have half of them in already, or more than half if there are repeaters.
The repeaters. So good. Well, that's really interesting information. We got to get moving here. Okay.
Jessica, you were there last night. Did you hear that also?
I did not catch the number, but
100.
But it is definitely more than we typically see pre-filed. So we are starting with a full load. And I think one of the things, in terms of reaching out to us individually during session, certainly emails, phone calls are still there. And in terms of scheduling meetings, my plan in my office is to pretty much take meetings the way I normally would, except they're all happening online instead of in person. So, you can still call the office and schedule a time to meet. It'll just be, online. The other thing, the one other impact, I guess, of having so many bills pre-filed and ready to start, we'll go right into bill hearings on day 2 of session, right? And so the committees are actually, my understanding is, going to really sort of pack as much work in as we can. So we may be spending more time in committee, meaning we have a little less time available to schedule these short, Zoom meetings and things like that. But we'll navigate that and work around it. But I think for all of us, communicating with constituents while we're in session is a critical piece of being in session. So we're going to find a way.
Well,
yeah, and just to cap that off, I think it is really important to stay on your toes about legislation this session, because the timing is going to be all different. It's going to be nothing like you're used to. Bills will, either move quickly or slow down all of a sudden, possibly because people are quarantined or there aren't the votes that are needed, or a quorum, or people present to be able to move legislation through. Things are front loaded. Things are very different this session than prior years. So the timing is all going to be kind of disorienting for people. So if you're following legislation, you need to really stay on top of that, because it could change very quickly.
Wow.
Let me just add
Something
one other
occurred to
thing.
me. Yep.
It's from the legislative committee standpoint. You guys are used to tracking bills. If there was a bill that already made it through the House and it's reintroduced this year and there have been no changes by the sponsor in it, don't worry about spending your time on that bill. That
Okay.
bill is going to pretty much, it sounds like what we're hearing is it's going to be quickly passed and get over to Senate, almost voted on, and many of them will be voted as, just a whole group of bills at one time, right?
Although you do have to worry about the
consensus
Senate, so
calendar.
talk to Senator Lamb. If we're sending bills over, make sure they get through the Senate. I will also point out that a typical thing has been to look at who co-sponsors a bill. We often are allowed to help or at least support by the primary sponsor asking us to co-sponsor. We have been discouraged from doing that this year because, first of all, that involves physically passing the bills around, and they don't really want us doing that. So I would say that if you're looking at one of us and saying, "Why didn't you co-sponsor this bill?" When you know we support it, you should think it's probably because they just physically weren't permitted to. So you can ask us if we support it, and we'll tell you them. And all the ways they've told you to contact us are valuable.
Okay, good. All right, any additions to that? Okay. Now, if there's anybody in our group here who would like to ask some questions, have we anybody with their hands up or a text? Raise your hands now. If not, I'll keep asking, but I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to get their questions ready. Alrighty, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to keep going. Oh,
there's a
Bonnie.
hand from Bonnie.
Okay, Bonnie, unmute yourself.
I think this is for Delegate Terri Hill.
Okay.
We have to ask every year, what's up with the end of life choice bill this year?
Yeah, I believe that the sponsor on the House Delegate and actually ACO Chairman Shane Pendergrass will be reintroducing that bill. I have not heard that the politics on it have changed, but COVID would certainly be the event that might change opinion about that bill. And I suspect what will happen is there'll be, some straw votes taken to see what the sense of the two bodies are. We got it out of the House. Remember, it got stuck by one vote in the Senate. So I would be very surprised if leadership is not set to get that bill passed this year.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing to keep in mind with that legislation is it got stuck in the Senate, but it also was kind of crippled in some ways through the Senate process, through the committee process. And that was the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. That committee's leadership has changed since then. So we're hopeful that, we won't have some of the poison pills that were put into that legislation even during that year that it died. Last year, I don't think it made its way all the way through because we just ran out of time. So it was actually 2 years ago that vote took place where it died on the Senate floor by one vote.
Yeah. And the other thing is that we have a lot of new, even though the term, we were elected and this is our third session. We have a lot of new members in the Senate and the House, including some of the delegates who supported the legislation on the House side have moved over to the Senate side. So I think this is a good year for that bill.
Okay,
Thank you.
now, thank you, Bonnie. Pat Rudolph had a question about mail-in ballots and whether or not we're going to see that. I'm going to look real quick and make sure I got it right. Do you believe that moving to an all mail-in election would increase voter turnout? And Delegate Ebersole has already answered saying it should be an automatic option.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think I don't think we're ready for it to be the only option, though. I think we need to keep voting centers. Also, there are folks who really feel strongly about going to the poll and putting their ballot in the box. But I do think that mail-in voting is a great way to increase participation, increase ease of voting, And, it may be something that eventually we shift completely to, but I think we should at least make it an option for everyone. And I'd like to see ballots mailed directly to voters.
We're fortunate to be in a state where we generally have made it easier for people to vote. And I think philosophically, all of us firmly believe in that. And so whether it's mail-in voting or keeping options open and available to people like voting centers that people can go in person to, all these options are ways that we hope will continue to increase voter turnout and participation. And we did, through mail-in voting this past year, have record turnout. So it really did work, right? And so, we will continue to look at that and extend those types of provisions to make it easier for people to vote. I think, while you see other states, making it more difficult and disenfranchising people, I think we certainly take a hard line to making sure that we actually expand it for voters to be able to participate.
I think many times we don't give voters enough credit, or people don't give voters enough credit. Ideas like this come up of having mail-in. They say, well, people won't understand that. They won't be able to figure it out. Well, we saw in this last election how well voters were able to pivot and figure out how to adjust to a new system where there were voting centers and not necessarily their own precincts, how to apply for mail-in ballots. And I think ultimately we can count on the electorate to really take up these ideas, especially because for many people, it's more convenient. Any way we can find a way to make voting more convenient for people and keep it, legitimate. And these are legitimate systems. I think we all support that, as certainly this group does, and many people in the legislature do.
And I'm just going to raise it's on the chat, but in case everybody didn't see it, Bill Miller's raised a question about redistricting and how that process will go forth.
Redistricting probably won't be up until next session. The census just wrapped this year, and so we have to wait for that data to come back to the state, and then the state probably over the summer will have a redistricting commission that will look at how these lines could be proposed to be drawn, and probably in all likelihood early during the next session, which would be the 2022 session, that the legislature would pick up on redistricting.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And Ron, you have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering about the overrides. Will they come up early in the session or not? I'm particularly interested in the blueprint. I have grandchildren in school, 9 and 11 and 13, and my daughter teaches high school in the county, and I get an earful from her about the challenges she faces as a teacher. For one, she teaches at Delaney High School, which is long overdue for renovation. So I'm wondering how soon these overrides will come up.
That's another bill we need to override. It's called the Built to Learn Act, which was a sort of a companion to the blueprint. When the governor vetoed the blueprint, there was stuff in the blueprint that tied those together. So he automatically vetoed the money that was to increase the number of schools. And in our district, we're in pretty good shape. Lansdowne High School is well on its way. There's already been funding for study, but schools like Delaney and Towson are not as lucky. And, as much as we care about our district, we care about everyone. And so what has to happen is we really are forced to take them up in our very first meeting. However, they can be laid over for a while. It really doesn't matter because they really would be written so that they would take effect at a certain period of time. And the current blueprint bill, as I explained earlier, really doesn't take effect for another 2 years. We already passed one in 2019 that is sort of operating at this point. So there should be no real loss if we pick up this bill and pass it at this time, despite the governor's veto. As for the money for the Built to Learn, actually, I'm going to defer to Delegate Feldmark. She's a little smarter on those things. She might have an idea of what happens when we override that, because she's really good at that sort of logistical stuff. Maybe I put her on the spot, but I'm gonna give it away.
We get along really well, and we have no trouble putting each other on the spot. So I will admit I do not know the technicalities of releasing the dollars in the Built to Learn Act when we override the blueprint. But in terms of timing, I think it's important to keep in mind, nothing's going to happen in those first few weeks, right? So we will go in and we'll all be on, we'll actually come into session to convene and open the session. But then the first 3 to 4 weeks, all committee work. We're not going to go back on the floor again for quite a while. So I don't think you'll see the vetoes come up until at least several weeks into session, we get back on the floor.
Yeah, and that's a very, very important point too, because most of these bills that are being considered for an override are actually House bills. So just by fluke of timing from last session, it was mostly the House versions that passed because of our abbreviated session and not the Senate versions. And because of that, the overrides have to start in the House. And as Delegate Feldmark just mentioned, you will not see many, if any, floor sessions taking place during the first couple weeks on the House side. I think the Senate will have some floor sessions, very limited floor sessions taking place. But if you're seeing that we are not taking up those overrides, it's because we can't. I think they have to originate in the House, in the body where they were first introduced. And so that means that they'll have to be taken up by the House first. So, just kind of stay tuned. Again, that's one of the quirks in the timing of this session that you have to pay attention to, that just because it's not being taken up right away, right at the beginning, doesn't mean that there's something untoward going on. It may just be kind of the timing of things because of the pandemic and how things are structured this year.
Can I just add one other piece on the kind of the substance of the dollars in the Built to Learn Act? Those school construction dollars were, that passed with bipartisan support. So if there is any technical glitch with the veto override and getting those dollars released, I am confident there will be a substitute piece of legislation to take care of it, right? That was not the controversial piece of that veto. It was, the tying of the two bills together, I think was to help strengthen the case for getting the blueprint bill to not be vetoed. The governor unfortunately decided he would give up the construction money to veto the blueprint. But there really wasn't as much controversy over the construction dollars. So if there is any sort of technicality with the veto override, I'm confident that will be sorted out, even if it has to be done in sort of a supplemental piece of legislation.
Great.
Okay, do I see any other hands for questions? If not, I'm going to take advantage of the moment to ask Senator Lamb a question, which Delegate Ebersole told me I should ask him. There's been a change in leadership in the Senate and Republican leadership, and I'm just wondering, are we looking forward to a somewhat less, how to put it, cordial relationship between the two parties in this session than we had in the past?
That's a good question. Thanks for putting me on the spot, Delegate Ebersole.
Apparently, I'm the champion of doing that.
But it's actually a very good question. So, we've had a lot of changes in the Senate. Last year was the first year, actually both in the House and the Senate, the leadership changed over, right? So we have Speaker Adrian Jones from Baltimore County take the lead in the House last year, and Senate President Bill Ferguson take the helm in the Senate. And in the Senate, that was a sea change because Senator Miller had been the president for over 3 decades. And so this year, new for this session, is the fact that the Republican leadership also changed. So about a month or 2 ago, the Senate Republican leader, Senator Jennings, from Baltimore and Harford County, also stepped down from his role, and the minority whip, Senator Hershey from Queen Anne's County, also stepped down from his role. I think internally there were a lot of discussions within the Republican caucus on the Senate side as to what direction they wanted to take, and so in their place, we now have a new minority leader who is Senator Simon Ayer from Anne Arundel County, and also new minority whip, the second in command, who is Senator Michael Huff from Frederick County. I think, you can see some of the changes in tact and potentially tone that I think the Republican caucus will take towards legislation that's coming up. I think there was certainly, with the selection of those two to be the minority leaders in the Senate, to take a harder tone and to view the minority caucus as one that views itself as more of a co-equal to the majority Democratic caucus. How that will play out this year, I'm not certain. So, obviously we have the challenges of operating in a pandemic, which is already going to be challenging and difficult, particularly as our time together in person is pretty limited. But I think you will see a different tone come out of the Republican caucus, probably one, I guess, let me step back a second and say, I think both parties have probably moved a little bit more towards their bases, right? And I think we're seeing that not only locally and statewide, but also nationally. There's just been fewer and fewer moderates, so to speak, that retain their seats and are reelected. I think the trend that you see from the Senate Republican leadership is a continuation along that trend, where their caucus is probably moving closer to their base, nationally speaking. And so, it'll be an interesting dynamic to see for this coming session.
Okay. Thank you for answering my question. Do we have any other questions? We have one more, because I think it's time to let our legislators go back to work and do what they're doing so well. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any hands. I'm going to just say one thing to Senator Lamb. I really appreciate your emphasis on oversight, on how the government actually works and functions. That's so important and so ignored so often. So thank you for that. All right, well, we want to thank our legislators for being willing to spend an hour with us. We've learned a lot. It's really been very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All for
you.
the opportunity.
Stay safe, everyone.
Okay.
You guys stay safe, be well, and enjoy the holidays. Happy Hanukkah, everyone.
Same. Bye.
Y'all take care. Have a good night.
Yep.
Night.